thank you very much to all senators for contributing. And I might just start with Senator Kyne's contribution in relation to the tax burden overall. And I completely agree with the Senator in relation to making sure, and indeed Senator Garvey talked about putting money back in people's pockets. And that has been the approach of this government, to be able to to extend the bans so that people are getting more of their tax as a way of supporting. That is a cost of living measure in itself, supporting families, supporting individuals who have earned money to keep more of that money. And indeed, Senator Warfield talks about mortgage interest relief, but perhaps rejects the idea of tax changes which enable people in the same circumstances to have more money at the end of the day back in their homes. So I hope that he will also support, and his party will support, similar extensions to the bans so that people can have more money on a weekly and a monthly basis. Can I just address some of the issues that have been raised by senators, in particular the LPG point, which I think was raised by Senator Casey and by Senator Garvey, and perhaps others, forgive me if I haven't mentioned them. And you're quite right to raise it, and indeed it has been raised a number of times over what has been a more difficult winter than others. And I'd like to say that the Minister for Enterprise, Simon Coveney, is looking at options for providing assistance to those businesses, and will revert to government with proposals. The reason that it isn't being done through this mechanism is it simply isn't possible for revenue to calculate, to monitor the usage of oil and LPG in the same way as electricity and metered gas. That doesn't mean that those people who are using LPG shouldn't have the same benefit as people who are using electricity and gas. And so, as a consequence, Minister Coveney is determining a scheme to try to provide support to people there. In relation to the VAT on hospitality, it was important that that businesses were supported through this period to the end of August. The Minister and I and the Department have signalled very clearly that this is the final extension of the 9% rate. It has been a temporary measure since first introduced in 2011, so it has seemed permanent. But I think with one interruption, it has been temporary for a different rate for different reasons. But this is the final extension in that form. But I do recognise senators' calls for looking holistically at hospitality and how those matters are considered and calculated. And if I could just say about the TBES scheme, I think it's fair to say when this was brought in, we anticipated very, very high energy prices, which didn't necessarily come to pass in the way that we anticipated because of a milder than expected winter, or a milder than usual winter, which I think is important. But it's also fair to say that the scheme itself saw a lower level of uptake than would have been initially expected. And I certainly was here highlighting the figures in different counties and encouraging businesses to sign up. So what was wrong with the scheme that people didn't take it up, or that it wasn't getting the money out? And I think it's always important to look at the implementation of those schemes. It only opened for claims in early December, and I think the time frame of the scheme, businesses may have been waiting for bills depending on their billing cycles of their suppliers, and that's an important consideration. But I do believe that also that the thresholds did have to be looked at again to make it easier and more attractive. Where I think is really important is that revenue are going to do this work for businesses rather than businesses having to do it a second time. And it's certainly my view that any time that the state and its entities can lean in to the citizen, can lean into people rather than making it inconvenient for people, and can do anything to maximise convenience, I think that's a good thing. So I hope that businesses will see recalculations, reassessments made for them, and that they will see the benefit of that in terms of monies being transferred to them in the coming weeks and months, and I think that's very, very important. I think Senator Garvey highlighted in particular, and others highlighted, Senator Kyne, the solar panels and the change in VAT on solar panels. And I think this is just absolutely hugely significant because it is yet another effort to try to help households and businesses and farmers in particular to be able to invest in solar power and to be able to get that. There is also issues about connecting to the grid, particularly for farmers around the country, and that needs to be resolved. But could I just highlight perhaps the role, in part of my role as Minister for Credit Unions, the role that credit unions can play to try to support people managing the complex process of applying both for a grant and perhaps for the additional financing, whether it's bridging financing or whether it's additional financing, and in particular highlight the work done as a community in Loughrea, where the Nave Brendon Credit Union have worked with the community to set up a whole energy area, analysing the needs of the community and conceiving it in a really thoughtful, integrated way with the credit union in partnership, supporting people as they look for loans at different stages to try to build out their solar capacity. And I hope that this VAT reduction will help counter will be of assistance, but that it will also help counter any increases in prices arising from supply chain issues and from the broader inflationary environment. So I think that is a really important part of this bill. Senators also raised, Senator McDowell also raised the broader macroeconomic position and the fiscal position overall, and highlighted that the necessity to consider what really to do with a budget surplus. And it is a very interesting and important time. Any time that the government is running a budget surplus is a good time. But our questions naturally and immediately go, well, how best can we use that money, and what's the most prudent and intelligent way that we can use that? We do have a very, very significant national debt. I think it's the second highest in the EU. And where we have the opportunity to, while it has been very well financed by the NTMA, it is still the second highest in the EU. And what we have learned from the crash is that we don't want to be an outlier. We don't want to be out on the edges of Europe in terms of our financial position. We were very careful during COVID to make sure that the extra financing that we took on behalf of the state kept us among our comparators, kept us among the group within the Eurozone that we wanted to be within, and didn't leave us as massive outliers. The place where we're different on that is our national debt at 226 billion. It's 44,000 per person. And it is a source of, it is a source of vulnerability, and it is something that we need to be conscious of. Nevertheless, it is well financed by the NTMA at very low cost financing, and that's been well managed. But we do have to consider how we use this money now, which we do believe is temporary and windfall. We do have a pension issue going forward. We do have a national debt issue going forward. But we also need to manage, as senators have said, the importance of managing a hot economy, as it were, an inflationary environment, the need to put money back in people's pockets, and the need to make capital investment and intelligent capital investment all the way through. And I think we've tried to strike that balance very carefully and thoughtfully to date, but we need to be continued to held to account on that by senators and by people in this House to keep our feet to the fire and making sure that we're making the right decisions and the right balance at all times, and not work ourselves into the difficulties of the past. Thank you.